Well, thank you for showing up. And for the next about 40 minutes or so, or how long it takes me to get through my 200 slides or whatever it may be, don't head for the doors. Really what the discussion here is about IoT and more the non-technical side of it. How do we make money at it? How do we work with it? How do we move forward with it? I'm privileged to work with just an awesome team. One of the team members is James Slater. I'm drawing a blank. James Salter. There we go. Sorry. He's our director of marketing, and he came up with the title, and I think the title is pregnant with a bunch of information. It's not data to dashboard. It's not data to database, nor is it data to device. It's really around data to dollars, how to monetize this. So, how do I advance the slide? So my background is technology. I'm an engineer by training. So I like to focus on the how of IoT, the technology behind it, MQTT, TCP/IP, NoSQL databases. But really, that's probably the wrong way to attack this. Businesses are more interested in the why of IoT. Why should I care about IoT? How's it going to increase my business? And really, the stronger the why you have, the better the discussions you can have with your customers about how to drive this initiative within that. The how is really a conduit. It gives you the ability to deliver that data to the organization. And really, if there's one point to take away from this deck, is this last one, is don't lead with the technology. Really, it's around understanding how that technology can enable their business objectives. So that's a really important piece of it. So let's take a couple of examples of whys. So at BSQUARE, we have an amazing customer base that we've gone out and flown an awful lot to speak about IoT and what does it mean to them and how they can monetize it and what they can draw new values from. And we've kind of distilled it to a couple of items here and some examples. So preventative maintenance, right? So the idea of predicting when a machine is going to go down is extremely important. Imagine if you're a truck vendor or a fleet manager and you're running these trucks around the world. If they're not on the road, you're not making money. So the ability to schedule downtime, extremely important. And you can easily draw an ROI from that. So it's very important to understand what the use case is. Really, these use cases that I'm showing here are really having IoT to enable them. So it's important to understand that. Optimization. We have certain customers who are actually looking at all their data coming in from the devices and trying to understand how to optimize it and actually sell that back as a service to their customers. So, Mr. Customer, your machine is only running at 80%, but we notice most of our customers run at 90%. Here's what you can do to fix that. Improved usage information. So this is an important, critical one that we learned as we talked to customers was it's important to understand how your customers ultimately use your product. So when you design the next version of it, you can enhance those things that they've told you that they liked and maybe de-emphasize those things that don't work so well. No matter how good you think you are at predicting when a machine is going to fail, they will fail. So the idea is the ability to bring these things back up and going and generating revenue is important. So improved failure in diagnostics, making sure you only send a technician one time and solves that problem. The last bullet is the one that particularly I'm interested in, and it's around new services. So IoT has a unique capability of generating new revenue for a customer, for a company, if they understand how to utilize it, how to sell to that customer. I'm going to quickly just brush through this, but the idea is they're business drivers. They're pretty common across all industries that are driving this thing. Most of these shouldn't be a surprise. I'd like to highlight the last two, though. The first one is around improved customer satisfaction. The idea here is you want to maintain stickiness with your customers. As you sell them new products that have IoT involved, you can actually maintain loyalty with them because you're delivering a very reasonable, a very good value to them, and they can roll that value onto their customers. And the other thing is we're all trying to be competitive. We're always trying to be ahead of the guy that's next to us. And so the ability to stay ahead of your competitors by offering some kind of differentiating feature, service, or anything else that you can make a differentiating, it makes real big important. This is a way oversimplification of big data and IoT, but really if you look at it, I think this is what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to collect data from disparate data sources, including sensors, humans, and other lines of business applications. You're performing some kind of analytics, and then you're drawing some insight and knowledge from that, from which then you can drive new opportunities. So a big picture, this is hard to achieve. It's a nice clean picture to speak to, it's hard to accomplish. You need a platform, you need partners to help you with this, because there's a lot of disciplines involved. I've been a little bit enamored with Henry Ford, because he's had two things that I think were well ahead of his time. But it's something that we can take to our customers, is there are times you can ask your customers what they think they need. Sometimes they'll just come back with a restatement of something they already know, right? So the classic case of, if Ford were to ask his customers what they wanted, they would want a faster horse, not a car, because they didn't conceive of a car. So here's an opportunity for us, as we build these IoT solutions, to really drive some of these initiatives and make them think outside the box. The other one is to encourage visionary statements. Really go for these big ideas, but also give them a platform, a set of tools to actually execute on those things. I want to start with a little bit example I think that's near and dear to all of us, and I personally have walked through, about data at the edge and how you can add value as you move up the stack. We all have one of these at our house. It's a fixed function device. It allows you to keep your temperature in your house comfortable. It holds the data. It does it well. It's data at the edge. So it doesn't share. It does its thing. It does it well. And it commands a price that is a commodity price. And at the end of the day, it's a commodity. Right, so you're going to go to Home Depot, or you're going to go to Amazon, you're going to sort on price. You're going to pick the lowest one that has the features you need. Let's take it up a step. So this is the one I bought. So it's the thermostat, same thing, performs the same function, except that it's wireless. They added a radio to it. They're going to charge me more money, nearly 3 times the cost. Is it because of the radio? No. It's because the added value, because now, not only have I made that data accessible, I've made it an alternate form of access. I can now access it from an iPhone or a mobile device. I can choose what the temperature is when I get to the house. So the idea now, it's the same device, it's still a thermostat. I've commanded 3 times the price because I've delivered an added value service. Let's take it one step further. So this is data that's been made available. We all love this guy, right? People line up to buy this at almost 10 times the price of a normal thermostat. It's a beautiful device without doubt. But really, that's not what people buy it for. They buy it for because it gives you the ability now to deliver data as a service. This little device not only controls the temperature, but it learns my behavior. It optimizes the temperature without me having to do a thing. And it's a valuable service. And obviously really valuable if you look at what Google paid for them, right? And what they're going to be doing as we go forward. So it's a great example of, as you go up the stack, you start from a device that's capturing data, add capability to move up, you can add more value, and you command a price for it. So you got to think about all these things as you move forward, right? Data at the edge is important, but data near the enterprise or near the business is much more important. So at BSQUARE, we kind of look at this as a workflow. So the idea is data starts at the device or at a data source, and then it gets refined through a number of processes before it can be actionable. If you start at the left-hand side, you acquire the data. You get it from a sensor, you get it from a database, you get it from a number of different sources. The next block involves the ability to interpret it. This data means RPMs. It means the temperature of room A at 10 p.m. or vehicle speed. Once you've got that semantic data, now you can apply analytics to it. And that's the third box, right? So now you're applying reasoning to that data, you're drawing insight from it, you're understanding patterns, and you're identifying events, meaningful events. Once you've identified those things, the fourth block is around acting on those things. What can I do to influence or optimize that behavior? And the last piece of it is IoT really is an ingredient in a bigger solution. So you want to be able to share that knowledge that you've gotten and share it with everybody in the enterprise. So at either end of this diagram, there's really going to be some service work talking to the sensors at one end and talking to the enterprise at the other. One last thing to note is if you look at the left-hand side, the acquire and the interpret, that's what I call the what is possible. The analytics and the act piece of it is what is valuable. And that's going to be important as we discuss the intelligence at the edge, and we'll talk a little bit later about that in a slide. Love this chart, and this is actually one we show with customers, and the reason why twofold. One, it clearly articulates the value of the data increases as you get nearer to the enterprise. So that's the first point. The second point is we can ask the customers, where do you fit in this diagram? Are you acquiring data? Are you acquiring data but you're not analyzing it? Are you not acting upon it? It allows us to have a very rich discussion with the customer as to the next steps. They may want to take the whole thing. They may want to take parts of it. And then at BSQUARE, we provide pieces to all of this. And it's an a la carte solution, so you pick what you want. The other piece to remember about IoT, it truly is an ingredient. And there are other pieces of the puzzle that you have to solve for, or at least have an understanding of. The first is the person, the people that are going to be involved. Ultimately, those are the guys that are going to determine whether it's a valuable solution or not. There's the process that takes those people and connect them to data that's available, either as synthetic data, which was synthesized through your knowledge base, or real data, and obviously the things that are producing, the consumers of that data. So going back to our little flow chart here of the flow, let's kind of concentrate on the bottom two boxes and talk a little bit about what the responsibility of those boxes do. I think this is pretty self-evident, but it's worth stating again that data really is the key. It's what drives all of these. On that second slide I showed, all of those value props were driven by the data and the ability to capture that data and act upon it. And that data may come from sensors, it may come from devices, it may come from other systems. So remember, it's all your data, not just the data from sensors. The other interesting aspect, as we've gone around to talk to customers, it became really apparent that the value, the IT value of the asset was actually more valuable than the asset itself. Okay, Dave, what are you talking about? What does that mean? It means simply this. The sensor, even though it may be very expensive, it pales in comparison to the data it's capturing and how it can influence your business. So the data and how it's processed, much more valuable than the physical sensor itself. So that has an important implication on your ROI calculations, right? It's not necessarily your BOM cost, it's what your end ROI value is. We get all excited about IoT around the data capture piece of it, and we should. I think it's very, very valuable, but it's a means to an end. It's step one of the process. We'll talk a little bit about enrichment and what that means, because I think that's extremely valuable. And the idea is really the data action workflow is not about getting data from one device onto your back-end systems. It's much more encompassing. We'll talk a little bit about that also. I'll apologize for the busyness of this slide. I'll speak to it a little bit more, but I want to give an example of what data enrichment really looks like. This particular application was a military application. They were in hunt of bad guys. And what they did is they collected a lot of geo information, and really three pieces of data, latitude, longitude, and timestamp. And they collected gobs of it. I mean, huge amounts of data. And they looked at that data pool and said, well, not very useful to us. We helped look at that a little bit differently and said, well, wait a minute. I think if you synthesize data, if you kind of look at it in a different way, enrich the data, it'll become more useful. And we walked them through the steps. So the first step is, well, if you know time, if you know position, you can then figure out distance. If you know distance and you know time, you can figure out velocity. If you look at the rate of change of velocity, you can detect safe points or bed down areas where people are spending time. If you correlate that with days of the week, you can kind of figure out patterns around that. And now what you've got is a database now that has both real data and synthesized data, but much more valuable. So now this pool of data that looked to have no value now becomes extremely valuable. And that was just a way of looking at the data differently. So data is going to come in three basic forms. You're going to have structured data, which is your traditional row and column-based data that you expect to come in easily to put into an analytic engine to reason over. You have the structured data, which is kind of social media, the free formatted text, a little bit of heavy lifting to get that into a more structured form. And then you have the really hard stuff, the audio, the video, the stuff that needs a lot of heavy lifting to get to that. My thesis is that you really do have to get it into structured format before you can perform any kind of analytics on it. So, I mean, to say that you can take all three formats and just push them into an analytic engine, I think is a little bit flippant and probably not fully thought out. So you really do have to have a process by which to get the data from a unstructured form into a more structured form. We can probably get into debate whether it's the 3 V's or the 5 V's, depending who you want to talk to. But I think really what I'm trying to convey in this slide is that the way you're going to get data in IoT and big data is dramatically different than the way you get data today. You're going to get in a lot more volume. It's going to come in a lot more frequently. There's going to be a lot more variety to it. There's going to be a lot more noise in that data. It'll be of questionable value. And really the 6th V is how do you handle all that, right? What's your vision for handling data in these different formats, and how do you do that? And realize that as you go on with IoT, you're going to have more and more of these types of data streams. Some good news is that you probably have a lot of data that you can actually leverage in an IoT solution. It's not all sensor data. In fact, I would say that a lot of the data that makes this so useful is stuff you have in the enterprise already. So the good news, it's a matter of integrating those in. Simpler said than done. Go deal with a partner or tools to get to that data. But some of it's there. Don't let that go away. Now, the bad news is some of that data is siloed, both technically and politically. So the idea would be that you may have some data that is in 2 different databases that technically it's hard to get to, or they may be geographically dispersed. Those are pretty easy problems to solve. The harder ones are the fiefdoms that are created by organizations to protect their data because it's so important, and they just don't want to release it. And so there's some political boundaries that need to be achieved. So you have to use the old social media, premise where in exchange for the data, we're going to drive you and give you some value, right? My kids will disclose anything on Facebook as long as they can declare that they've had a good day or share a picture. So that same mentality has to apply in this space too, is to drive that value. This is an interesting slide. This actually came out of the Foster Group. It was just 2 years ago. It's a little bit dated, but it's a very, very interesting chart. And the question was simply this: what does big data mean to you? What does that whole thing means? And the light blue, the cyan, is the technical. I think it's technically focused. Yeah, it's the technical decision makers. The dark blue are the business decision folks. The dark blue are the guys going to write the checks. Those are the guys you really want to talk to. And if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, this says, yeah, I get big data. It helps me, analyze it. I can draw some business value. These guys kind of get it. But you notice that the business guys always lag the technology guys. The other really interesting piece, if you go on the left-hand side, that's the camp that says, I have no idea what this is. It appears to be snake oil, but I don't know. How do we do that? And you see that the business guys far outweigh the technology guys there. So there is good news that for those that do take that big step and move forward with big data and IoT, that there are really measurable gains that they get from it. You have deeper insight, a lot of the neat things that you'd expect. The one I'm particularly interested in is about the 4th or so from the bottom, is increasing revenue. And I have another slide that speaks to that because it actually is increasing. People are understanding that it's more than just capturing data and figuring out what it means. It's actually figuring out a way to generate new revenue streams within the company. And that's, I think, the real promise of IoT. The dates on this particular slide may be wrong, but I think the sequence is correct. So the idea is back when, a decade or 2 ago, getting data was extremely difficult. And so it had to be very pristine. It had to be very clean. You stored it away in very expensive databases. You were starved for data, in essence. So it became very difficult to make these broad brush type discussions. Then we moved into the information data warehouse age, which was the garbage disposal of data. You threw everything at it. And you had different dimensions and pivots that you did on it. But it really was post-mortem forensics. You use the data to try to make better decisions for things that were going to occur in the future. right? Use the past to forecast the future. Roll forward to today, and really what we're trying to achieve with IoT and big data is the ability to actually impact the device at the time that the event occurs, right? So it's a combination of big data and fast data, and be able to close that loop really, really quickly. So that's the challenge ahead of us. Use another example here. I truly believe that we're really, really close to having autonomous cars. I think it's really close. In fact, I think a lot of you guys are doing that right now, right? You're texting, you're reading newspapers, you're browsing. The only difference between the future and now is you actually won't be driving in the future. So it's a little bit staggering that we're doing that today. But so this is an example of how IoT and edge intelligence is really going to evolve over time. I'll use an SUV as an example. The manufacturer would build these things, send it out, sell it. They would probably never hear back from it ever again. Then we added a diagnostic port, where the manufacturers added a diagnostic port to allow folks to connect up to look at emissions and check engine light codes. So what that allowed you to do is do a batch operation where you actually took every time the truck rolled into the service bay, you downloaded some data. It was probably limited, and it probably was only for a week back, but at least gave you some insight into what the truck is doing. The next slide is we got smarter even, and we said, let's do it. Let's use telematics. Let's use cell and satellite. As the truck is driving down the road, let's capture this information. But it was static. At the time of manufacture, you defined what that data was, and it didn't change for the life of the truck. Where we're moving to is a more dynamic version where you're actually sending new information to the truck, new sets of rules to look over information as it comes back. So if you're in a cold weather area, you may want to look at data a little bit differently than if you were in a hot weather area. So this becomes that more dynamic bidirectional flow. This is a heavy slide here, but what I'm trying to get here is I think we've also changed fundamentally how we look at data capture. It used to be that we would try to understand that we only got a little bit of data. Let's figure out how we can draw some insight. The world has totally changed. Now we say, give us all the data you got, make sure it's accurate, and by the way, make sure we get it in real time, right? Because there's a concept of time value of money. That also applies to data. The longer that data is stale, the less relevant it is. So you need accurate data that occurs in real time. You need to link that to the other sensors and other systems on the device to understand correlation. You need to enrich it with your enterprise data to make it even more valuable. And then this whole thing has to be done continuously. You continuously update the model, the data. So let's go for another question here. So the Forrester group went back and asked, so what are you using IoT and how are you displaying it? And no surprises here. The top two things is they take the data and they generate reports, they generate dashboards. We've all seen that, we all use them all the time. What's really intriguing, though, if you look further a little bit down at the circled areas along with the percentage there, those are growths year over year from 2012 to 2014. So the big areas are around analysis of processes and preventive maintenance basic operations. Those are the big growth areas. And if you notice, year over year, reporting actually has gone away, has dipped a bit. And the reason for that is these other areas are more productive. Reporting and dashboarding still requires a human to look at the data. These other methods require the computer to figure that out based on knowledge that you've captured. So this is ultimately where we're going, and this is where we need to be. If we look at the way you analyze data today versus what I think you'll be doing in IoT, we both start the same way. So in the traditional approach and the new way is you understand what is the area you want to improve or draw some value from. So you start the same way. But then we diverge very quickly from there. So in the traditional way, you discuss which data you need to get to. You define your data model. You define the reports in the dashboard. And this is all done in a waterfall approach. So if you do one iteration, you ship it out, you get it done, you get a little bit smarter, and you have to do it again. Doesn't do well for your ROI because you have to do it in this stair-step manner. Where we're moving to is this more data science approach where you assemble all the possible data. It's like brainstorming. You don't discard anything. You take it all in. You assemble a data, possible models to work off, But then you iterate, but you only iterate down that bottom piece. You look at a new model, you don't look at the way you get the data again. So you're quickly able to articulate and move through it. You hear this term all the time, right? Data can be transformative. Francis Bacon is kind of a thought leader way back when on causal relationships. And his, at the time, was a very popular saying was, knowledge is power. And if you go back to our silo model, that is true, right? If you're one of those silos, that data you hold is power for you, and that's why you don't want to relinquish it. But we may want to think this out a little bit better. Maybe it's more power. It's not so much power, but it's profit, right? The organization can actually profit from that knowledge, and that's really where you want to get to. Going back to our workflow, and we'll focus a little bit now on the analytics piece. This is the one that's getting a lot of press, and I'll talk a little bit about some machine learning things and some pitfalls there, but and other ways of looking data. But this is the area that requires a rethink in the way you look at data. So you hear this concept all the time that data talks. So it doesn't lie, but it can be misinterpreted. And we'll talk a little bit about that why. And sometimes the understanding of the why is not, or understanding the why is sometimes more important than the what. So I may be more concerned about why something happens instead of what actually happened. But that's sometimes. And let me give you an example there. We actually worked with a soda machine vendor that, and we were collecting data from the device and found out that for whatever reason, whenever there's a full moon, they sold more Dr. Pepper. And so trying to figure out why in the world that was the case, we actually, worked hard to try to understand what that correlation was, but ended up not finding it. Walked into the vendor, tails between our legs, and explained that we failed. We found this event, but we couldn't figure out the cause. To which the vendor said, I don't care about the cause. All I know is when it's a full moon, I'm going to load more Dr. Pepper in the machine. Right? So they didn't really care. So again, you can't use a one-size-fit-all model on this. Some folks are interested in the causal relationships, and those are interesting. But sometimes just understanding that the fact the data says this, you want to just execute on that. Going back to our first point, I don't know if I didn't know this, but Facebook has a gift program, a gift card program, and actually it was born out of big data. So this is what they did. Their data indicated that, my gosh, a lot of people were sending these birthday greetings, and gosh, they did it really, really quickly, and there were gobs of them. They must want to be able to send a gift to that person too, right? That's really what they wanted to do. So they made this big leap. A lot of data that says I'm sending a lot of birthday cards. Those same folks want to be able to send a paid gift. Well, sadly wrong. Really the main reason people were using Facebook was it's probably the laziest and easiest way to send a happy birthday greeting. And they've already down traded to sending these cheap messages. They're not going to up trade to send a gift, right? So the data, if they were to actually look at it, they would have found out. You can get a robot that automatically sends a happy birthday gift to you or a message. So if they looked at the data and they noticed that at 12:01 everybody got happy birthday gifts or happy birthday messages, they would have known this is not correct. So treat the data as sacred, but understand interpretation could be less than that. How about mistakes you can make with big data? Because you can. One of the biggest ones, and we fall into this especially on the technology side, is we don't answer any business questions. We answer interesting questions, but nothing that you can draw value from. So make sure the questions you're trying to analyze for make sense of the business, you can extract some value out of it. The other problem with big data is because there's so much data, you can easily determine noise. You can have noise in the data that you can misinterpret as something that really isn't what it is. The Facebook example is that. The next one's very interesting and very important. So mistaking correlation for causation. This is the dilemma you can get into if you just use machine learning without applying any reasoning to it at all. The example I'll use is that there was a guy that looked at the murder rate versus ice cream vendors and found out that, oh my gosh, whenever there's ice cream vendors on the street, the murder rate goes high. For whatever reason, when you have a lot of ice cream vendors, people are offing themselves for some cause. Obviously, that wasn't the problem. What the cause was the temperature went high, people walked outside, as people interacted, sometimes bad things happen. So the idea, just assuming there's a correlation between something just because there is, isn't the root cause. You have to be careful about that. The other thing is many of these systems are really probability systems. They're statistical significance. That's what they're looking for. So attempting to generate a forecast, this will happen when this occurs, is dangerous. You want to make sure that sometimes it's a predicting, that you provide a probability. And then you make some reasoning around that. So you have to support, your platform has to support this fuzzy logic that it mostly is true or it mostly is false. Chaos theory, and this is the butterfly effect, and the idea there was that even small problems in your model or things that you didn't put in the model could dramatically affect the outcome. The butterfly effect came in because there was a probability that a butterfly flapping its wings 2 weeks ago could affect the weather today, and there was a lot of studies around that. So the idea is you need to have an accurate model and a system that allows you to model and change that model as you move on. And then there's the unknowns, the black swan events. There are certain things you'll never be able to predict. You'll never be able to predict that a truck gets into a car accident which generates a maintenance request, right? That's something you're just not going to be able to do, I suspect, for a long, long time. So danger, because the problem with IoT and big data is it forces you sometimes into this really terrible path of a services-led engagement where you build a custom app around single value statements. And it's not repeatable. It has all the badness of some of these solutions, right? It's low agility. You've got to refix it again as you become smarter. It's high cost, high risk, and it's definitely not scalable because you have very highly skilled personnel doing that. Make sure you choose a platform that understands that and provides the agility and the ability to mitigate those things using a strong platform and product offering. So we're getting close to the end here. So let's focus a little bit on really the high value side of IoT. And this is the side that says, now I've found all this insight, I'm going to act and share upon it. Really, this is what you're trying to get to. The unfortunate thing is, I think we build IoT solutions like an island. They're beautiful. And the reason why they're beautiful is no one goes there. It's too hard to get to. It's an island unto itself. It doesn't do anything. So what it really needs to be is more of an archipelago, right? Is you need to integrate with the existing line of businesses, be able to, make those, supersize those, and make those better, right? Most organizations have a very rich and field-proven infrastructure. Don't rip and replace. Go in there and leverage it, make them better. IoT is really an enabler in that area, right? It's never really meant to replace those things. This is a little bit of a techie thing, but we talk about actionable data, and when we talk about that, there's two things, kind of terminologies that you have to think about: sensitivity and specificity. And really, they're two opposites. The sensitivity is how many times do I predict something's going to fail, and it does. And the exact opposite is that how many times do I predict something's going to be healthy, and it is. And those things have a dramatic input on how you phrase your business problem. Let me give you an example. So we could tune a system, and we've done this, where you've said, well, we'll set the sensitivity to 30%, which basically means of the 3 times out of 10 I've predicted a failure, it actually happened. Now you get some naysayers and say, well, that's not very good. I could flip a coin and do better than that. But the problem with flipping the coin is it's not actionable. I can't do anything with that knowledge. The inverse of that is I could say, you know what, let me change my business problem, my statement that I'm trying to solve for. And I could say with 100% accuracy, somewhere in the US there will be an engine failure. Great and fantastic, you're at 100%, but it's not actionable. I can't do anything with it. So somewhere in the middle is where you need to be at, and you have to have a platform that varies depending on what your level of risk and tolerance is for false positives. I think this is an area that we don't really talk a lot about simply because it's on the other end of IoT. But user adoption is extremely important. You need to be able to have your system be used, otherwise it's not worth having. And part of that is live where they work. The idea is if you roll in a new system and have to retrain folks, there's just a tremendous downside to that, and it's going to be tremendous uptake before they become productive at it. Leverage what you have and be able to integrate in. So our solution at BSQUARE is called Data V. We have integration into Office. A lot of folks spend a lot of time in Office products, Outlook, Word. If you can bring IoT into those products, you immediately make it usable without having to retrain. So keep that in mind as you build these things out. And really, things are better together, so you really do want to leverage what you currently have, and rip and replace should be your last option. Use that as a last-ditch effort to do that. So BHAG, which is it comes from the book Built to Last, and it stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. So the idea is you want to drive these initiatives with your customers. Think big. You want to build the Angry Birds of the Internet of Things. What does that mean? I am quite sure that Steve Jobs, when he went to his board of directors and said, or he didn't say, I have this idea of building this game where you chuck birds at pigs. And by the way, we'll need to build a phone to support that. It's the exact opposite, right? He built a platform on which you could build applications like Angry Birds and send us back into the Stone Age. But in any case, the idea is he built a platform that could do that kind of stuff. We have to do a similar thing for IoT. It's like the OS for IoT, the OS for data. Really our biggest thing, going back to ROI, is we're trying to give people low friction access to that data so they can make some very, very smart business decisions. You cannot do anything without mobility in place anymore. We're all carrying around cell phones. Really, they're a key to our lives. Just accept it. It's only going to get better or worse depending on how you look at it. But one thing to look at is look at your mobile phone a little bit differently. It's not only a device to present data, it's a fantastic device to collect data and allow you to visualize it. Humans are fantastic sensors. Capturing that information in the form of forms is something that could really be useful if you leverage it correctly. Think about your IT folks too. The poor guys are being pounded on two sides. They're getting increasingly demanding users, more sophisticated users, and they're dealing with systems that are ever more complex. IoT is just another thing they have to think about. If you're not careful, what you'll run into is you'll get a system like this, right? So it's a mess. No one wants to touch it. It was built stovepipe. It was done to solve. There was no strategy. It's called an accidental architecture. I accidentally built this. You cannot accidentally unbuild it. It's a tremendous amount of work to fix. And this is the evil side of IoT. So you do have to have a strategy and a platform to move forward with it. There are strategic and tactical goals that you need to address. And I call it the land of vision. You want to encourage that with your customers. Think big things, right? Think about what you would want to do when you finally grow up with IoT and big data. But understand there's a reality of tactical things I need to deliver against. And more importantly than that, you want to make sure that you reach down to your customers. You don't want to reach them up. I'm going to go quote a stat. I can't find the source of it, but it's to my benefit, so I'm going to use it anyway. It involves retail. 70% of the retailers out there, obviously not the big box guys, these are the more mom and pop shop, but 70% of those folks have no idea, no visibility into their online inventory. So imagine that. They have no idea what's on the shelf. They don't even understand what's in the store. Yet you come in and pitch them a story that we can analyze your customer's behavior so you can direct them to the right shelf to pick up a product. They don't even know what the inventory is. So the point is you've got to reach down to where your customer's at and bring them forward with you. Give them some capabilities there. There is no more important point than talking to your customers. This should not be a lab experiment. Understand what their needs are and figure out how to map those needs to IoT and what it can provide, because it is an enabler. And then be willing and accepting of failing fast. That's the way lean startups work, is you try something, either it works, if it doesn't, you fail, move to something else. You have to have a platform that supports that. You don't want to spend 6 months developing something just to figure out that it'll never fly. So how do I get to a call of action? And here's some simple things to think about. Think big. Continue to think big, but start small. Big data starts with small data. Big ideas start with small ideas. So you need to develop what's your IoT vision, and really that should be developed around a business model, a business case. Understand and model some use cases to start, and then to define incremental steps. Don't forget to have your vision remain clear as to what the goal is. Again, no need to rip and replace, and you shouldn't. That's probably not a good strategy. It's kind of like hope is not a strategy. Rip and replace isn't one either. You need to develop internal champions within your organization. This stuff is hard, and you have to have someone that's going to continue to drive it. Do proof of concepts. It's a fantastic way to validate some of the ideas you think you can make business at, right? Spend a bit of time, work with a partner, and get those things built up in a very short period of time. If you choose the right tool set, the right partner, these things are measured in weeks, not months or years. You want to get to this time to value, time to market as quickly as possible. IoT has tremendous value, but it does have a timer ticking with it. And if you don't do it, for sure your customers or your competitors will. Find a partner like BSQUARE to help you out with these things. We provide a number of those products to do that. And we are really, really, truly engaged and really excited about what the opportunity lies ahead of us. So with that, I'm going to come in time. We do have a white paper on kind of the text of this. It goes a little bit more detail. Please feel free to come by the booth, talk to us, and pull it up. It's also on our website. Love to talk about any initiatives you have going on. Other than that, thank you very much.